what we're going to try to talk about today is a little bit more about intelligence reporting and how our technology and the capabilities and what we see in the marketplace. So a quick little background. My background is actually U.S. military. I was in the intelligence side of the house. I did reporting and collections there. And some of the problems that we faced in the U.S. was the areas of how do we actually fuse some of that data. So if you are working in the areas of common operational pictures, data fusion, and trying to actually solve those kind of concepts, that's what we're going to talk about a little bit. But we're going to start off with a little bit of a history lesson. Maybe not lesson, it's not the right word, but story. So back in 1991, there was a desert storm, the Gulf War I, many different names for this. But basically in the US and all the different countries that were actually committed into that engagement, we were starting to do intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance. This primarily was remote sensing, satellites. And what we were basically doing is we're bringing down a lot of imagery. That imagery was later on being shared amongst different people, and the way we were doing the sharing is metadata. To be a valid metadata card at that time was basically you needed 4 fields of metadata. The sensors themselves, the satellites, the planes, they generated those 4 fields of metadata. So if you were an Air Force collecting that information and the Army needed that information, all you need to know was 4 different fields of metadata to be able to search it and find it. We were sharing this amongst coalition partners. We were sharing this in different locations, and people were able to see this in different concepts and operations. So now, war on terror, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria. What does reporting and intelligence look like nowadays? It's very different from 1991. 25 plus years removed, we're seeing a lot more all-source reporting. We're seeing a lot of more documents, finished intelligence, so to speak, analysts building their documents. In the law enforcement side of the house, you can imagine this as case officers actually generating their own reports. That's now part of the intelligence that the next person uses to make their decisions. It's no longer just the raw imagery and metadata. Nowadays, because things are in document styles right here, the concept is that there's a lot of unstructured information. There's no longer 4 metadata fields to be able to find your data that's actually meaningful. In the US, it's actually called 11 plus 1 plus 1. That means you have to, at a bare minimum, have 11 fields of metadata to be a valid metadata card. If you're an investigative officer in the police, if you're an intelligence officer in the military, how many people do you think fill out all 11 fields or all 13 fields of metadata to make it actually searchable? The answer is typically about 0. Nobody actually fills these things out, right? I see some people laughing because maybe they're the officers themselves and they know they never would fill it out themselves. The concept is that when the system generated it from a satellite or a plane, it was automatically filled out. When you ask individuals to fill out a whole bunch of metadata to be able to make that document searchable later on, never happens. So the problem. There's a terminology called TCPED. The military, we love using our acronyms. TCPED stands for tasking, collection, processing, exploitation, and dissemination. So most people, the military has grown up historically all around tasking. We'll send a tasking order, whether that's flying over, doing an operation, collecting this intelligence. That tasking order is something we were very used to. The collection, that's intelligence nowadays. We fly that mission, we go out and do the collection. What is a little bit more newer being last 10 years or so, is the emphasis on PED, the processing, exploitation, and dissemination. After you've collected it, if you don't send it back to the analysts and thus out to the decision makers, it's really useless. You might have flown a life or death mission over somewhere to collect something, but you still might not actually be able to actually use it. So you have all this different collected information, you have all the different analysts actually put this information together, and you're trying to finally build FinTel, finished intelligence. And what happens? What do each and every one of you that are analysts do today? You probably put it in a PowerPoint or a PDF. And you email that off to your supervisor or other teammates. PDF and PowerPoint are just about the worst possible file formats to actually share information, to be able to actually use it and disseminate it. It's great because it's an image that we're used to, it's a format we're used to, but how do you actually search it? How do you understand what's in it, besides reading every single one? I used to work for a think tank in DC, and we used to joke about it that we could win a war by bombing them just with PowerPoint. We produce so much PowerPoint every single day that how could you possibly read through it all? So if you can't search it, if you can't understand the documents in it, it's kind of worthless, right? So in MarkLogic, we talk about the concept, and actually it's not just MarkLogic. Worldwide, a lot of people are understanding this concept called POL. POL is the idea of people, objects, locations, and events. We look at things as objects. We look at those things as entities. And we, from a geeky point of view, from a database point of view, we model those things as entities and objects. We're not using a relational backend. We are the database itself. We store things as a document because it's all one entity. And then the relationships themselves, how they actually connect with each other. So if you can imagine an entity and an object, a tank, a boat, a person, an organization, an event. So the concept and the challenge is really that we're bringing all this information in from many different sources. I'm a person, I'm an object, I'm an entity, but my data is stored in the country of Singapore, for instance. ICA might have some of my data, MOM, ACRA, right? Police, hopefully not, but all those different people might have some of my data. So if you look at a holistic perspective and you're going to make a decision on what to do with me as an individual, don't you want to have the whole picture? Not just that one piece from ICA, not just that one piece from MOM, not just that one piece from ACRA. How do you make a decision unless you bring it all together? Now comes the concept of how do you even fuse that? How do you treat those entities there? There's some concept of master data management. We can talk about that another time. But the concept is we bring all those pieces of data in from many different sources. We do that very easily. We do that for a lot of different people. And then you kind of create those objects. One of the other challenges we're seeing, this is especially in the battle space, but it's also in the police force. You can think about the idea of a concept that we all get because we probably all watch too many police TV dramas. The idea of confidential informants. Everybody gets what that is, right? The concept of, you ask somebody to give you some information, maybe paid them, maybe extorted them, whatever it is. Intelligence has the same concept with intelligence assets. When you have those type of CIs, you don't necessarily want to share that personal CI with everybody in the department. You definitely don't want to share it with a sister agency, and you definitely don't want to share it with a coalition partner from another nation. But that intelligence might be very important to share with other people, or else you're not catching the bad guy. The concept is also the police officer walking the streets, the ICA agent at the checkpoints, or the soldier, sailor, airman, marine that's in the field. They need the intelligence forward, but they don't necessarily need to know sources and methods. So the concept of security is utterly important. We all care about it. We don't want to lose, we don't have our data compromised, right? Our CIs are important to us. The way we collect it is very important to us. But we need to get the battlefield person that information. So be able to do security on the fly so that way you can still have your central intelligence, right? Your sources and methods. So your intelligence people can still make those good decisions. But at the battlefield space or at the policing space, you should still probably have a picture, name, arrest maybe, proceed with caution. You need 4 different pieces of items. But about me, you might have hundreds. Who I met with, who's my relationships, where I bought, what I bought last time I was at Fair Price. All those things you might have about me from collected information, but the only thing you need to share with that police officer in the field, that soldier out in the field, is just a few pieces of information. So how do we do that for the warfighter? How do we do that for the police officer? And more importantly nowadays, especially in the criminal world, we're kind of seeing that there's no such thing as an individual offender. In the terrorism world, where a lot of us care about in the counter-terror space, there's no such thing as self-radicalized. There's nothing that I hate more than that term, self-radicalized. The reason why is because nobody's actually self-radicalized, right? They went to some website. It might not be that they had engagement with an individual, so don't get me wrong, right? But the concept is they engaged with something. That something is still, from our perspective, an object, right? That website's still a concept, right? So when we're looking at things, we want to see how they're connected. Because when we're doing investigations, when we're trying to understand things, when we're trying to understand in general, we want to see how things are related to each other, right? So the idea of you have these objects, you want to look at all of the sources of intelligence and see how they're connected. So what website in the dark web did I go to find jihadist information? Who did I share that with? Why did I share that? Those are all aspects of semantics. I can talk more and more about semantics, but I only have a few more minutes of time, so we can chat another time. What we're seeing, this is worldwide. We see this in just about every country that MarkLogic operates, in every military area that we see. But the data is basically in many different shapes. It might all be structured, it might all be relational, but the problem is that it's all in many different types of relational, many different types of structures. So how do we bring that together? All different systems, they're built and they serve a purpose. We can't just take them down, we can't just modify them very easily, we can't just export from them that easily. So how do we bring all that together? One piece of data to you might be different to me. How do we put context behind that for the meanings behind different things for different people? And one of the more fun things is data changes. So I know we're at a GIS conference, right? Esri is a great partner of MarkLogic's, and so there are certain aspects in GIS that don't change. We just heard about the spatial temporal, for the people that were in this room, we just heard about their spatial temporal big data store, right? So we do know that in certain things, spatial things, time series does matter. But what else matters in that changing of time? One of the fun scenarios that's always kind of interesting is the idea of if you collect on a building and you say this building is a hospital. Is it a hospital 24/7? Maybe. Most hospitals are. In a war zone, is that hospital 24? Is it a hospital 24/7? And we see more and more that that's actually not the case. We're seeing that buildings of healing, buildings of worship, buildings of education are also used by bad actors. So now do you label that building as a building that has terrorists in it? Or do you label that building as a building that's a hospital? How do you track that? It's a little bit different than the use case that we were just talking about up here with the spatial temporal store with lightning strikes in the US. We're talking about uses. So from 9 to 5, this building is used for this. And we know it's never really 5 on the dot. But we also know that if we're going to send in police to go kick in the door of a place to try to arrest people, we need to know what time we need to send them in. It's not as clear as this building is bad, this building is good. It's no longer that case, right? So, very simply, besides the geospatial aspect, which is utterly important, we also need the context of temporal, and we also need the context of semantics. Semantics are those relationships, those between entities, those concepts. How does a decision maker bring all those things together? So, commercial company, this is the part where I make the plug, right? So forgive me. But basically what we are is a database, right? We look at things very different. We're a partner of Esri's because we help with some of those spatial aspects, we help with those semantic aspects, and we work side by side with Esri and some of Esri and MarkLogic's biggest customers in the US and internationally. So we're a database, we bring things in different ways. This is what we're probably used to, a lot of us in the, oops, wrong button. In the middle here, relational databases, what all of us are used to seeing. What MarkLogic does and why we're different is we store things in documents and we also use semantics. Documents allow us to be much more flexible. Semantics allow us to actually show relationships. Ironically, relational databases are not very good at showing relationships. And documents allow us to have many different structures. It doesn't mean we're unstructured by definition. XML, JSON, we actually have structure, but the benefit is that we can bring in any structure and many structures. And we don't need to know that structure before we bring it in. So the first step in a MarkLogic project is we load the data. For any of the IT people in the room, maybe that should just blow your hair back because that's a really hard thing to do in most relational systems. Happy to talk more about this in another time. But I want to get through the scenarios because that's probably the thing you guys care about a little bit more. So, structured observations is something that we tend to see as being a change for a lot of us. So the timelines in battle damage assessment, how does a situation or a building change? How do events change based on time? So if you're doing BDA, battle damage assessment, sorry, you've dropped bombs and you're flying over and now you want to make sure you understand what was the assessment at that, things change, right? We want to be able to search for the data. We want to be able to go through the data management. We want to do that for every single feature and every single image. How do you compare and contrast? And how do your different users bring that data together? What I mean by that is the collections nowadays and the intelligence reporting is not one person. One person doesn't own all of Intel. One person doesn't even own all of the collection on this one image. That's probably going to 2, 3, maybe even 4 different offices. Maybe it's going to a coalition partner. Once everybody puts their structured observations together, I see this, I see this, I see this. How do you bring that all back together now? We go back with our coalition partner, we go back with a different ministry, and then we want to come back and we say, do we all agree on this? How do you look at those observations? Typically, right now, that's just a Word document and then thus save as a PDF. But again, you can't really share that after that point. So how do you look at those structured observations and actually see the differences and changes? Another one that's fun, intelligence operations. One of the things that we do with Esri is we help bring things into the semantic context, as I mentioned, and then from there, we actually can put it back in a geospatial context. So if you can imagine a whole bunch of unstructured data, and you want to see who's actually mentioned in that unstructured data, and you want to see how they're related to each other. Chris called this person emailed this person was in the same geospatial location as this person. How do you do those type of searches? We do those searches across all the corpus of data, and then we can actually put that back in a geospatial context by pushing it back over to Esri. We connect directly with Esri through the REST feature service, the ArcGIS feature service. So that concept of semantics is what powers this. What powers the idea of the relationships. When we're looking at bad guys, when we're looking at how things are connected. Sometimes it's not even bad guys, right? Sometimes it's just community management. When you're doing community management, who's your community leader? When you're thinking about SG Secure, who are the people in the community that actually have emergency training? And then we can put it into geospatial context. So if you can think about police, Blue Force responding to an incident, or SCDF responding to an incident, who are the other people that are in our area? Who is related to that? So this is the concept of all source intelligence, right? We want to be able to seamlessly go back and forth between a map view, a semantic view, and then a search view and concept. If you can't go back and forth between that, then we get stuck into one box. More and more today, imagery, I shouldn't say imagery, the GIS analyst is more of an all-source analyst today than ever before. SIGINT analysts tend to be still just SIGINT, right? GIS analysts, you put all the different data that you're bringing in from many different places in context geospatially. So you have to be able to know how to bring all that piece of information together and make sense of it. Poll I already kind of mentioned, but the idea of when we look at all the different feeds, this is it's just one use case from a criminal perspective, from a policing perspective, where we're looking at crime from many different ways. So if you can imagine, all of these pieces on the side are all different databases and different data feeds. How could we possibly make decisions and intelligence, finished intelligence, unless we're bringing it all together? We've run into that case a lot of times in different places, and sometimes it's beyond police information, sometimes it's community service information, sometimes it's healthcare information. If a minor was abused as a child, and then they're later on an offender, how does that actually be managed into the system? A lot of governments really care about this because of the way that you have to protect your citizens. So POL allows us to look at individual people. This is what we're really getting to, right? The concept of all source. So this person, their baseball card, all the information about them, to be able to easily search for all the information on the persons, their background, their information, and then all their relationships. I'm running out of time right now, but if you guys have any questions about this, I'm happy to answer more at our table outside. But basically what we are, again, is a database. We're very easy to get data in. We're search built right into the database, so it's easy to get things out. And the most important thing for any government customer or any large enterprise is that we're enterprise ready. We have high availability, disaster recovery, and we can support all those aspects. So that's pretty much it. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them now or answer them outside. Thanks.